Jenyk, and I teach at Youngstown State University. Aside from a couple gen ed classes, I mostly teach principles of micro or macroeconomics. And most of my students, when they come into the class, have never taken an economics class before. So they have not taken it in high school. And they expect, when they walk in, that we're going to primarily be learning about two things. Any guesses of what those two things are? Stock market and money. That's exactly right. So when I ask my students, what do you expect that we're going to be learning about in this class, stock market and money are usually the first answers I get. So I tell them, well, we're actually going to be learning about a lot more than that. In fact, we hardly talk about the stock market at all in my principles class. And you're going to see that economics is all around you. So during the first week of class, we cover all of those key ideas, right? So incentives, cost-benefit analysis, efficiency, resources, all of those facts that go into an entire course. And I tell them you're going to be seeing these ideas throughout the entire economics course, opportunity cost, scarcity. And then I tell them that in addition to these key concepts, graphs are an important part of this course. And as Alex just mentioned, I think that's very scary to students. This is usually the face looking back at me when I tell them that graphs are an important part of this course. So they're terrified, right? And I tell them it's okay. Graphs are just a picture. They're a picture of the economic concept. And if you understand the concept, the graph's going to make sense. But they're still looking at me with that face. So the first graph that we encounter in my class is the production possibilities curve. We go through the construction of the curve. We go through all of the underlying assumptions. When I tell them that we assume that our economy can only produce two things, they think that's kind of strange. And then when I tell them that our economy is going to produce guns and butter, they think I've gone crazy, right? Why on earth would those be the two things that our economy would choose to produce? But I kind of just let them think about that for a while. And so we go through the construction, the increasing opportunity costs, that whole lesson. And I found that at the end, students were still looking at me like this, right? They are not convinced that this is not going to be the most terrifying class they've ever encountered. So I realized that they needed more concrete, real-life examples of the opportunity costs of the entire production possibilities model. And so I started to think about how I could incorporate that into my class. Well, at this point in the class, we have already covered the difference between like a market and command economy. So we've talked a little bit about North Korea. So I show them this video of a military parade in North Korea. And I asked them to just watch the video and just jot down some of the things they observe as they watch it. Right. All right, so after the students watched that video, I asked them, what did you observe? And so they point out that they saw tanks, helicopters, airplanes, lots of guns, lots of people in the military, right? And then I share with them this statistic from the World Food Program, that 81% of North Korean households are classified as having poor food consumption based on a survey by the World Food Program. So they are experiencing regular chronic food shortages in North Korea. In fact, 33% of children in North Korea are chronically malnourished. 25% of pregnant women are malnourished. And so then I asked them, given this information and what you just observed in the video, at what point, if we assume that North Korea is operating on a PPC, at what point are they operating? And students pretty quickly realized that they would be operating at a point, of course, where we're heavy on the gun production, light on the butter production, so maybe at that point closer to the top of the PPC. And so now they kind of have a story to go along with this graph. They have a concrete example that, again, kind of gives them a better understanding of what the PPC is telling them, what the underlying message is. So I asked students, assuming we're operating at that point on the PPC, how many people think that that's a good choice for that society? How many people think that's desirable? Nobody raises their hand. Then I say, would that be efficient? And a couple kids in the front of the room that have been listening to me in the earlier lectures kind of raise their hand, and then they get really embarrassed because they think that they're wrong. But yeah, assuming we're on the PPC, that would be efficient. And so I think that's a good way to, again, clarify how we define efficiency within this model. So then I was worried that students might think that this only applies to a country that's poor, right? So North Korea is a very poor country. So if they're going to have a military, of course they're going to have less resources available for consumption. And so the next part of my lesson brings it to the United States. And I thought the best time in our history to focus on when this is especially relevant is World War II. So our needs for military goods skyrocketed. So at this point, I also reveal that guns represents military goods, and the butter represents consumer goods. So then students can kind of better understand that the PPC model kind of serves as a representation. It's not that we just think economies only produce two things. So a time in our history in our country when this was especially relevant was during World War II. Our need for the military goods skyrocketed. And so what does that mean? Well, it means less butter. And there's a lot of really great examples you can find during this period in our history that really tell this story really well. So for instance, auto manufacturers in our country received huge contracts from the government to build or to manufacture military vehicles. So during World War II, a lot of those auto plants shifted to production of military vehicles instead of consumer goods. So that idea of shifting our resources and moving along the curve. When we increase our military production, that means we have to sacrifice consumer goods. And that means that consumers have less stuff to enjoy. And the way that the government kind of got us on board with this was through a lot of promotional posters and pamphlets. And rationing is a really great example, again, that you can use to relate this idea of the PPC to your students. So I'm going to share with you a couple of these government posters. Do with less so they'll have enough. And we have this soldier drinking his coffee. So coffee was something that was rationed. Rationing gives you your fair share. So again, kind of giving consumers that nudge that rationing is going to help the soldier. And you're going to be a big jerk if you kind of drink more coffee than you should, because then he won't have enough. Rita Hayworth, a popular actress in that period, is actually pictured here. Please drive carefully. My bumpers are on the scrap heap. So I asked students what message is being sent in this picture. What are they trying to convey? And students do kind of get, well, the bumper the metal in the bumper can be turned into military goods like ammunition. So this is another good example of that idea. Relate it back to the PPC, movement along. So our resources are limited, and if we want to produce more of one, that means we have to sacrifice in the production of another. The next one I'm going to show you, I think, is my favorite, and it's the favorite among my students as well. A little dramatic. A little dramatic. Yeah. This is a good one. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. So, of course, encouraging you to join a car-sharing club, carpooling, to save on gas and rubber. So students kind of enjoy these, and again, I think it provides a good story behind the production possibilities curve, and I think that helps them, when they go and look at that curve, to have these to relate it back to and think about what that curve is actually telling us. So then an exercise that I give my class to kind of measure their comprehension of the PPC are these political cartoons, and these are drawn by Dr. Seuss. So the kids like that. So Dr. Seuss did a lot of political cartoons during this time period. And a lot of them do focus incredibly well on this lesson. So I was really excited when I found these. And so for this assignment, I have students get into groups of about 4 people. I think 4 is kind of that magic number. And I have them look at the cartoons, and I tell them, just explain what Dr. Seuss is trying to convey using some of the economic terms we've talked about in this chapter. So relate it back to the PPC. And so students seem to enjoy this activity, and they seem to get it pretty well. They see, for instance, in this cartoon, we have Uncle Sam trying to make a victory omelet, but he doesn't have any eggs. And again, that idea that a lot of our materials that had been shifted towards the military production are no longer available for consumers. So this cartoon is again encouraging consumers to reduce their use of gasoline, rubber, so kind of reduce their consumption of travel because we need those resources for the military. So all aboard if you insist, but if you want to help the Army, stay at home. Here's another good one to kind of explain how resources can be shifted in the production process. So we have some guys postulating about war strategy, but yet they have this giant scrap heap in their backyard that could be used for military goods. This next one I think is one of my favorites in terms of how it applies to the PPC. So we have a turtle at the bottom, and it's called Dawdling Producers, he has written on the side. And it says, you can't build a substantial V out of turtles. Of course, the V for victory, kind of that classic symbol during World War II. And this is one that a lot of students kind of struggle with, but I wanted to share, to go on Thomas Andrews' Hall of Fame wall. The top quote is a response from one of my students just this semester. So they said, turtles are slow, and Dr. Seuss is trying to compare them to producers. This exemplifies inefficiency. If this were on the PPC, it would be on the inside. So this made me so happy. It brought tears to my eyes when I read that. This student really got it, right? They really got the message and how it applied to all of the things I had been teaching during that lesson. But in the interest of full disclosure, not all of my responses are that eloquently stated. One of the reasons I like this assignment as well is that it's relatively Google-proof, so students can't just run to Google and try to find the answers. And when one of my students did try to go to Google on this one and find the answer, I'm guessing they just put turtles and Dr. Seuss in the search engine. And so they ended up writing me basically the summary of the Yertle the Turtle story by Dr. Seuss, which was not what I was looking for. Brought tears to my eyes for a different reason, I think. So this is another one. This is a really good one that students can kind of interpret in a bunch of different ways. So when I first saw this cartoon, and I saw it, so it has this guy calling in sick, and it's talking about how essentially war production drives report sick and injured workers lose 6 million workdays every month. So the way I interpreted this was that, again, kind of that point inside. So if your labor is not showing up to work because they're sick, then they're going to be inefficient. We're not producing at our full capacity. But some of the things that I've seen students kind of pull from this one is that kind of pushing your resources too much. So kind of trying to operate beyond the PPC and how that can be detrimental to the health of your workers. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take on this as well. So yeah, just wanted to share that one with you. So another way you can kind of incorporate the production possibilities and this period in our history into your lesson is to talk about labor. So labor, of course, is an important resource in the production of our goods. And during this time, a lot of our able-bodied men were being shipped overseas, right, to fight in the war. And so a lot of students never have taken an economics course, but they are familiar with US history. So they have taken that in high school, and they kind of know this story a little bit. So I tell them this is a picture of my grandfather. He served in World War II. And so I said, well, people like my grandfather were off fighting. That created a problem in our country, right? So we needed people in factories to be working and producing all of these goods to support the military effort. But we had a huge chunk of our labor kind of taken out and serving overseas. So how did we solve that problem? There she is. Yep. Excellent job. So Rosie the Riveter. So women, like my grandmother, actually went into factories and worked. So my grandmother worked as an ammunitions driver out of an arsenal near my town. And this was a way to kind of counteract that depletion of our labor resource during the military when a lot of the men were out fighting overseas. So again, this takes a story that's relatively familiar to a lot of the students and kind of just shines an economic light on it, right? So they can start to think about how these everyday events that they're familiar with or events throughout history can be explained through the economic lens. And again, I think as most of us would agree, that's kind of a main purpose of the principles class, is just to get kids thinking, how does economics apply to the things I see in everyday life? So I wanted to share with you this quote by President Eisenhower, and it's from 1953. And I'm pretty confident that an economist must have written this quote, because it's basically opportunity cost in a nutshell. So modern weapons take food from the hungry and shelter from the homeless. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hopes of its children. Opportunity cost, right? It's not just about the money we're spending. It's about the resources that are not able to then produce something else. And so then during your lesson on the PPC, usually kind of one of the final parts of that lesson is economic growth and the benefits of economic growth. And I have to thank A.J. Summel, my colleague at Youngstown State, for sharing this video with me, because it is the perfect way to end this lesson. So when we talk about kind of today, so of course we've still been engaged in wars. Most of the people in my classes have never kind of experienced that kind of sacrifice. And when I ask them, why do you think that you're still able to enjoy all the butter you want, right? You don't have to ration. The government doesn't ask you to ration your butter or coffee so that the military can have it. And that's one of the benefits of economic growth, because it gives us more guns and, more butter. So we're going to see in this video.
America wins again because we live in a buttertopia. We've got stick butter, tub butter, whipped butter, honey butter, and spray butter. We have so many goddamn kinds of butter that we have produced a product called I Can't Believe It's Not Butter. Because if you pick up any random object in the United States, there's a good chance it's butter. At our state fairs, we carve butter into historical figures. We deep fry entire sticks of butter in other butter. But of course, if you're talking about pure, unadulterated butter flavor, I believe you cannot beat it fresh on the cob. I'll tell you what, Norway, that could use some more butter. And you know what? I can feel the pounds just melting off. You know what this would be a good time for? A commercial break. We'll be right back.
Thank you.